Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's top 10 worst episodes of Star Trek. In this countdown, I will count down my 10 least favorite episodes, i.e. the worst episodes of the entire Star Trek franchise in my opinion. This video is where I cover my number 5, getting into my top 5 worst episodes of the entire Star Trek franchise. My number 5 worst episode of Star Trek, and that is The Muse, which is episode 21 of season 4 of Star Trek Deep Space Nine. So in this video I will give my full-length review of The Muse. If you want to see the rest of the videos in my top 10 worst Star Trek series, you can check out the description below. There's a link to a playlist which will have all of the videos that I have done in my top 10 worst Star Trek episodes up to this point, or at least up to the whatever the latest video I just came out with point. Anyway, so I was tempted to title this video hashtag fuck the Muse, but I'm sure YouTube would take away my monetization for having the F word in the title or in the tags or anywhere near like that, so I will just say in this video hashtag fuck the Muse. Now that's been a running thing on my channel for a while. I think it started from one of my commenters, I believe Valentin Voss, or however you say his name, but it's catched on. It's been a thing. I've been saying a lot hashtag fuck the Muse because I don't like this episode, and I've been very vocal about this in the other videos I've done. I covered Deep Space Nine, every episode one season at a time on my channel, and other various countdowns and whatnot, and I mentioned I really don't like this episode, so that became a running hashtag fuck the Muse. Now I've watched several other YouTube videos, review channels, who thought this episode was decent. Like, didn't think this episode was the best thing ever. But they're like, yeah, it's not that bad. It's okay. And I've heard that opinion from several people as well. It's like, oh, this isn't one of the worst episodes ever. This episode's fine. There's not much wrong with it. And, in fact, I had a comment questioning my hatred for this episode, saying that, hey, I really like The Muse. So this gave me the false impression that this episode was actually well liked and that people were pretty split on it. But after doing some research, I found that it's not necessarily the case, that those opinions I stated that I either liked this episode or thought it was decent are actually minority opinions, because I went on to IMDb that have the average rating of all the episodes, and this was the 3rd lowest rated episode of Deep Space Nine. Only 2 episodes that were higher than it were Let He Who Was Without Sin and Meridian. Like, there's another episode of Deep Space Nine that will appear higher on my list of worst episodes. And this episode was actually higher than that, as far, or lower, however you depend, as far as the worst episodes go. Yeah, even though I don't think this episode's quite as bad as that other one, the popular, or the opinion seems to be that this episode's even worse. And doing some more research, I found a few people who were involved with creating this episode. They don't like it either. Most notably is the director, David Livingston, who is a classic director of Star Trek. He's done episodes Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, and I believe Voyager, perhaps even Enterprise too. I don't know, maybe he gave up before Enterprise, but I don't remember. Regardless, he is a classic Star Trek director. He's one of my favorite directors. I think he often does a really good job. And let me quote what Mr. Livingston says about this episode. I think it's one of the poorest efforts. I let the material down because I just didn't know what to do with it. And More recently, in 2012, David Livingston said that he wished that the Muse had never been produced, remarking that it was not good. Also, Iron Stephen Bear says that the script had problems, while Ronald D. Moore also agrees that they tried, like they started out with some good ideas, but it just didn't come out right. And another gentleman who was a regular scriptwriter for Deep Space Nine, who I usually don't attempt to pronounce his name because I shall butcher it, is Rene Extrazavara. Yeah, completely butchered that one. But anyway, he is a regular writer on Deep Space Nine who also said, I had no feeling for either story, because there's two stories in the Muse. There's an A plot and a B plot. So it seems those involved in creating this episode, they didn't like it either. And I agree. Now, here's another thing. Anyone familiar with my channel, particularly if you're watching my Star Trek Next Generation season reviews, where I cover every episode of the Next Generation, one season at a time, you're probably sick to death of hearing me say this, but, you know, I'm going to have to say it, and I'm sure I said this on my Deep Space Nine reviews as well, is that I don't think Lwaxana Troi had any business being on Deep Space Nine. I think her Deep Space Nine material is much, much worse than her Next Generation material. Now, the reason why I keep hammering this home, because there's a couple of popular YouTube reviewers, or one in particular that I like to watch, who constantly say the opposite. Constantly saying, I've heard this opinion through several people, that they thought that Lwaxana Troi's Deep Space Nine appearances were better than her Next Generation ones. And to say I disagree with that is a bit of an understatement. I wholeheartedly, fully, violently, 1000%, to the nth degree, strongly, immensely strong, to the infinity level, disagree with that. It is impossible for me to disagree with that statement anymore. I think that her Next Generation appearances are miles ahead of all of her Deep Space Nine, because she made 3 appearances on Deep Space Nine. The Forsaken, was that one, Fascination, and this one, The Muse. And funny enough, when I did my top 30 worst episodes of Deep Space Nine, all 3 of those episodes had a place in my top 30 worst list of all Deep Space Nine, as I think they're all terrible. Now, I've yet to do my top 30 worst list of Next Generation, but just going off of, because I'm up to season 6 in my rewatch as I record this video, and from what I've seen so far, I think there's only going to be one Lwaxana Troi episode out of, I think there's 6 of them in Next Generation. 1 out of 6 is going to make my 30 worst. Whereas Deep Space Nine, all 3 out of 3 make my worst. And I think they're terrible. Now, and of course, this is the worst Lwaxana Troi episode, in my opinion, the absolute worst. Now, there's one episode from Next Generation which I think is their second worst, and to be fair, it was really considered for my top 10 worst episodes of the entire Star Trek franchise, but didn't quite make the cut. Would probably be my 20 worst, and that is the second season episode, Manhunt, which, to be fair, was the most annoying appearance of Lwaxana Troi ever. Even though this is the worst episode Lwaxana Troi was in, the most annoying, the worst she personally was at, where she was at her worst and most annoying, was the episode Manhunt, which was very agonizing to watch, and for different reasons than this episode, which is also agonizing to watch. But regardless, like, here's the thing. Next Generation has episodes of Cost of Living, which I actually enjoy, which is this episode's ripping off, by the way. by the way. Cost of Living, which is actually a really enjoyable episode, even if it's not great. Like the B plot was a complete waste of time, but it's a decent episode. It's got Dark Page, which is actually a really good episode. Highly enjoyed that. And it has Half a Life, which I personally think is the best Lwaxana Troi episode. I mean, it's miles and miles and miles better than anything in Deep Space Nine. As I said, all her appearances in Deep Space Nine were shit. Where you got Half a Life, you got Dark Page, you got Cost of Living, and even Haven. I know not everyone disagrees, but I actually liked her in Haven too. I thought Haven was a decent episode. Really, the only bad episode she was in was Manhunt. I mean, there's Menage a Troi, and some people hate that episode too, but I thought that was okay. Like, I didn't think it was great or anything, but it was fine. I didn't really have an issue with it. So her only bad appearance in Next Gen was Manhunt. Every single appearance in Deep Space Nine was absolutely agonized. She had no fucking business whatsoever being on Deep Space Nine. So, anyway, getting into more specifics about the Muse. So, this episode is an A-plot, B-plot structure. And both plots suck equally. Like, it's hard for me to say which is worse, which is less worse, because they're both terrible. And I've heard a common opinion that, well, like, the Jake storyline is way worse than Lwaxana's storyline is actually decent. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to disagree with that as well. I think the Lwaxana Troi is just as terrible as the Jake storyline. Like, they're both like, and this is like a rare example where, because usually you got A plot, B plot, there's a few examples where they're both great. There's some examples like where the A plot's amazing but the B plot's okay. Like I was talking about one of my favorite episodes of Deep Space Nine the other day, Behind the Lines, which some people argue, oh, it's not a great episode because the B plot with Sisko at the station was kind of boring. I actually thought it was okay. I didn't mind it, but the A plot was so amazing. I think overall it's an amazing episode. I don't care what anyone, and the B plot's not even that bad. But then you have a lot of like season 5 Next Generation episodes, like Cost of Living I mentioned, and so the one with Worf's son is a very common thing to have an A plot and B plot, and the A plot was like a character story and the B plot was just some throwaway anomaly bullshit. That's very common. But this is one of the only examples where they have two very different A and B plots, and they both suck. It's like the worst episode. Like, each one, if it took up the entire episode, would be considered one of the worst episodes of the entire show. But they put both of them in the same goddamn episode, and that truly makes this a unique example. So anyway, let me start by talking about the Lwaxana Troi storyline, since I already mentioned her. Now, this, like I said, this isn't her at her most annoying. That's Manhunt. She's not actually being all that annoying in this episode. Like, she's not going around like trying to fuck all the men like she usually does, like she did in Fascination, and being like, oh, like, she's not that bad. Maybe that's why some people say that it's not one of the worst Lwaxana Troi episodes, but I think it is. First of all, it's really horribly written. Like, I know that Module Barrett is actually a decent actress. Like, I've seen her, like, some of her other appearances as Lwaxana Troi. I actually think she, like, Half a Life and Cost of Living and Dark Page. She actually does a really good job. And I've seen her in other things, and she's a good actress. But her acting came off as terrible in this episode, and I realized that a lot of it had to do with how poorly the script was written, and also, as David Livingston talked about, how he felt like he didn't even try directing this correctly. It's just, in the whole episode, both storylines felt really, really flat. Like, this whole thing, and I think I mentioned this before in one of my other reviews, the whole episode comes off like a first draft, like a second draft, and that kind of speaks to what Ronald D. Moore said about how they tried, but it just didn't turn out very good. And it seemed like they needed more time with it. Now, The Lwaxana Troi storyline apparently was Nigel Barrett's idea. I never said she was a good writer. I said she was a good actress. And her idea was that Lwaxana get pregnant with Odo's baby, probably not realizing that that's not really biologically possible with changelings. She probably doesn't understand how changelings work. Now, I mean, this was before Odo became a solid in season 5, so she didn't know about that. So the writer's like, oh, okay, well, that's not biologically possible, so let's do something similar to that. And they decided to create the character of Jayal. This asshole guy who wants to take the baby away. Now, first of all, okay, so this story's a terrible idea for several reasons. First of all, why would Lwaxana go to Deep Space Nine to hide from him? Why doesn't she go to, I don't know, who is it that she has a close relative with who is in the perfect position to hide and protect her? Who am I thinking? Could it possibly be her fucking daughter, Deanna Troi? Why doesn't she go to the Enterprise? Why, in fact, why is Deanna Troi not involved in this at all? Well, I mean, we know the real reason. The real reason is because Next Generation finishes run, and Deep Space Nine is now on the air, so they can't do this as a Next Generation episode. So they have to involve Odo, even though it makes zero sense that she would fucking go to Odo and not her own goddamn daughter, especially because Jean-Luc Picard on a Starfleet vessel would be able to hide her much, much better from this Jayal asshole guy. I mean, this is a public station. It's a port. Anyone is welcome to dock, and as he points out to Odo when Odo arrests him, is like, I have a legal right to be here. You can't stop me from coming. Whereas if she was on a Starfleet vessel, that fucker couldn't just stroll on and be like, oh, I have a right to be here. Jean-Luc could be like, no, fuck off. This is a Starfleet ship. You have rights to be here. You have no right to be here. You're just here to steal the Lwaxana's child, and I won't have it. So fuck off, or I'll fire my face. Well, of course, he wouldn't do that. But still, the point's obvious that he could do a much better job. Now, I know what some people are going to say, because this episode came out in DS9's 4th season, which was aired about a year after Generations, so technically the Enterprise D was destroyed, and they didn't know when they made this episode what the deal with the Enterprise was. In lore, they said that the Enterprise E was created a year before First Contact came out, which would include this episode. This episode is within that year, so technically the Enterprise E would be around during this time period, although, to be fair, like, the writers didn't know that when they were writing this episode. But regardless of all, even if you say Troi wasn't on the Enterprise, she could be in a Starfleet installation, and she's her fucking daughter, so she would have better say of it. So this makes absolute zero sense that she would go to Deep Space Nine and not her goddamn daughter. I mean, you could throw in some bullshit. Oh, maybe the Enterprise is like off in deep space exploring and can't bullshit. Anyway, sorry, not buying that. But here's the thing. So I never bought her relationship with Odo in the first place. As I mentioned, The Forsaken and Fascination were both terrible episodes also. And I had that one scene in the elevator with Odo, changeling, having to melt in this changeling form, melting in her dress, and she's being very sympathetic. And so many people, well, that's a good scene. Well, okay, it is. But I still don't buy her relationship with Odo. That episode still sucked, by the way. Just because there's one decent scene doesn't mean that episode doesn't suck. But anyway, and regardless of that scene, even though I thought that part of it was touching, I don't buy that she had such a connection to Odo that he would be. I mean, let's face it. I mean, based off of everything we've seen of Lwaxana Troi, in every appearance she's ever been in, she flirts with every fucking man she comes across, or at least one in every location she's at. So why she single out Odo out of all the thousands of men I'm sure that she's had a thing for? And let's be fair. Surely she's met some men who've actually returned those goddamn feelings. Maybe one of them would be a better candidate than this guy who clearly, and she even says it herself, clearly does not feel the same way about her. Now, you could be like, well, Mark, he's a security officer. Yeah, but her daughter's a Starfleet officer, so fuck off right off with that bullshit. Anyway, sorry. So anyway, surely she's met other men who are in positions to protect her. Because she just flirts with every man. That's her whole character. That's her whole point. And so has it said these two characters, and other than that stupid elevator scene, which is not enough, these two characters have not had any chemistry, and I just don't buy them together. And it seems, as I said, this is like very poorly written when she just shows up in his security office. And it's like, oh no, I'm pregnant, blah. It's like, it's not a well-structured story. It doesn't go from progress right. It's just boom, hits you right in, and so you feel very disconnected, and you don't believe these characters, you don't believe her plight, you don't believe why she'd be there. There's nothing believable about this at all. Also, while I'm on the subject, let's talk about how this episode is just copying the plot from Cost of Living. Now, it is different, you could say, because Cost of Living was about marriage and this is about pregnancy, but it's the same fucking thing, because in that episode, she wanted to marry this dude she never met just because she's lonely and she needs a man, and eventually she decided that it wasn't a great idea. Here, she meets some dude who's obviously a huge asshole and has this whole, like, alien culture. It's like his whole tradition is that if there's a child in the marriage, the boys get raised by men only and girls get raised by women only. And she was like, oh, but he said he wouldn't do that because he's special, which clearly he was lying. And let's see, who is it that is able to detect if someone is lying or not? Oh, let's see, maybe it's the fucking telepath who could read people's minds. You see how I'm going crazy, which is how terrible this episode is. Anyway, but regardless, it is just rehashing the similar plot of Cost of Living, which was done way better, by the way. That was actually a decent plot, how she had her midlife crisis, and she overcome at the very end. She decided not to marry this stuck-up prick because she wanted to live her life and be free, and her need to be with someone wasn't that great. She realized it was a good character journey, actually. And here they just took that character journey and whoop! Threw it right in the garbage. Fuck that character journey. Let's just have her go right back to where she was and marry some asshole and have this baby, and where he tries to steal it away from her. And instead of going to her daughter, he goes to some security guy she barely knows. I'm sorry. I'm rehashing that point. Alright, I gotta talk about Worf, because there's the scene where Worf appears with Lwaxana Troi. Lwaxana Troi is at Quark's bar and she's being all depressing and everyone's being depressed, and Worf is just like, oh, I'm so depressed, and Quark's like, get her out of here, I'm gonna kick her ass. So Odo goes over and says, oh, well, you want to go for a walk? And Worf is like, I would. And Odo's like, I was talking to Lwaxana, not to you. Here's the thing though, Worf hates Lwaxana, and and they didn't even actually acknowledge that the two of them knew each other at all, which I wish they would. And actually, some people may be surprised by this, but I long for the days where she was going around being annoying and calling him Mr. Wolf. I actually thought that was really funny. That was one of the things I really liked about Cost of Living. She's like, you're doing this to your own son, Mr. Wolf? And she's like, it is Worf, madam. Like, do that. Like, why didn't he acknowledge, like, why is he hanging out with her when he clearly doesn't like her and finds her the most annoying person ever? Why didn't they acknowledge this? Why didn't he say, oh, Mr. Wolf? Like, I don't know. some people might say, oh, well, Mark, you should count your blessings. It's not as annoying. But I actually like that. This poorly written, out of character, contrived plot bullshit about her losing her son, that's bullshit. I would actually prefer a annoying Lwaxana calling him Mr. Wolf. That one was funny. So, all that is terrible. Then we get more like cheesy scenes with her and Odo where he makes a blanket with her. She did try to show that she's understanding. Ooh, this is for shape-shifting, blah, blah, blah. And I still don't buy any of this bullshit. And then we get to the marriage. Alright. Now let's talk about this wedding scene. I gotta talk about this wedding plot. So, plot convenience, no, I'm sorry. Let me get into details. So, the deal is, so the jail dude comes on board the station demanding his son back. And the deal is that Odo finds a loophole in the culture of this alien throwaway one. I'm not even going to learn their fucking name because it doesn't matter. Finds a loophole in their culture that if Lwaxana marries someone else, then that man can raise the son, not necessarily the biological father, which is a very plot convenience rule if I've ever fucking heard one. Anyway, so Odo's like, oh, well, the solution's simple. I'll just marry Lwaxana, and then I can raise the child, and we get a divorce 2 months later, and she can raise him, so it's all good. But then there's the dude, like, Lwaxana's like, oh, no, it's not that simple. And it's funny that Odo didn't actually find this out in his own research, because he's actually a meticulous researcher, as we know, so why wouldn't he know this shit? But anyway, it's one of 1,000 flaws with this. But anyway, so Lwaxana is like, oh no, because he can go to the wedding, and if he doubts his sincerity, he can call out and challenge the wedding. Oh, these are like some of the fakest fucking stakes I've ever seen, ever. Not just in Star Trek, but ever. So, so they had this stupid wedding, and Odo has to, like, you know, pronounce his undying love for Lwaxana and convince this asshole guy, and he Odo's like, oh, says some shit about how he cares about Lwaxana, and the dude, of course, is an asshole about it, and it's like, well, you could be talking about any woman, blah, 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 and Odo's like, oh, no, it's not just anyone, this is someone who's really cared about me, and blah, 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 and he starts speaking, like, to what he thinks is very sincere, and then the guy's like, oh, you won me over. You're totally right. I give up. You do love her. I see where I'm beat. That is... Give me a second here. That is so ridiculous. That is so stupid. That is so fake. That is some of the worst writing I've ever seen. Ever. There's no way. I'm sorry. Sorry for losing my temper, but there's no way that this asshole guy, which they made it very clear that he wants to raise his son, he doesn't give a fuck. He knows that Odo is just using this as a ploy to stop him from raising his own son. So he's not going to give the fuck about what Odo says. Odo could say the most sincere ever. Odo could be actually in undying love and truly love Lwaxana, and this guy still would not give a fuck. They made that clear. There's no way. This is some of the stupidest, most cliche, dumbest sitcom writing I've ever fucking seen, where he's like, whoa, okay, I see you actually do love her. I'm just gonna fuck off now. This is so stupid. It is so stupid. Oh my god. So after the wedding scene, we follow that up by Lwaxana gleefully deciding that she's going to go back to Beta Z, and Odo is very disappointed and wants her to stay, but she says, you know, you don't want a lover, what you want is company. You're still in love with Kira, and I want much more from you, and I will resent you for not giving it to me, so it's better if I just leave now. And so they part ways. Now, out of context, this is actually really good stuff. It's really powerful. It makes sense. I sort of can relate to it on a personal level. Unrequited love is a pretty powerful thing. But in context, this is completely out of character for both these characters, and I don't fucking buy it. First of all, Lwaxana Troi being the mature, wise one to be like, oh, I know you don't love me, but that's not Lwaxana fucking... Who the fuck is this? That's not Lwaxana Troi. Lwaxana Troi's like, oh, you're so in love with me. I know you love me. I can read your thoughts. You think I'm sexy. Ooh, let me smother you. That's Lwaxana Troi. I don't know who the fuck this is. And Odo, I don't buy, like Hassan said, I never bought his relationship to Lwaxana. I don't buy that he's become attached to her. I don't buy that he actually wants her around. And it seemed like the way they were playing this character, they were kind of playing him like he did love her and did want to be married to her. And this is a storyline that they could have done so much better if they did it with someone else, not Lwaxana. Just not. So it's just completely like this whole episode is out of character for both of these, and particularly this scene. And so, yeah, this whole storyline is a disaster. Do not let anyone tell you otherwise. It is the worst Lwaxana Troi. It is the most poorly written, underdeveloped, not thought out of character. Even more so than Manhunt. As much as I hate Manhunt, at least it's in character for her. It's just, it's a lot more annoying than this episode, to be fair, but I think this one is worse written. Just the quality, structure-wise, is just terrible. So, that was the B plot. Oh, God. Now, let's get into the A plot, which is just as terrible, and to be fair, possibly a little bit worse, which is a pretty big accomplishment considering how fucking terrible the B plot is. That this A plot could manage to be a tad bit worse really goes to show how much it sucks. Now, here's the thing. Okay, so the A plot is it's a very stereotypical cliche sirens type storyline, or if that's what you call it, or where you have a female character presence that is like sucking the energy out of the male character and basically just using them just using them in order to suck their life force out and pretending, like feigning love or affection, but really they're just using them to eventually kill them in order to strengthen themselves. This is a storyline that's been around for centuries and been done over and over again. And this particular version of it adds nothing new to it. In fact, it is just an old rehash that is a shadow of many other versions of this that was done a lot better. And it's silly. It is so silly and over the top. Especially, I'm sorry, I believe her name is the actress who plays this woman character is Meg Foster, and I've heard some opinions even from some of the people like Ira Stephen Bear involved in this episode who admit it's not a good episode, will say, well, the one good thing about it is Meg Foster's acting, and I gotta very strongly disagree with that. Now, Meg Foster is an actress I recognized when I first saw this episode from some time when I was like sick or bored or just flipping through channels and I was watching some really crappy B movie on HBO, because she's been in a lot of these really crappy B movies, and her performance here is particularly terrible. It's just the way that she's like, oh Jake, I can foster the creativity from you. Like, just her whole like intonations and the way she speaks is so fake and ridiculous and just silly. Just flat out silly. And especially how she's supposed to be this magical muse that can bring out creativity. And it's just, oh, I've known all these creative people throughout history, and blah, 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 blah. And what she does is she takes him and she does a writing exercise, which is actually a very common writing exercise they teach to beginning writers. Like, I've done it myself before, which is and personally I think it's shit. I don't think it didn't really help me, but hey, it helps some people, so whatever. But anyway, the exercise is that you just write whatever comes to mind. Like, you don't think about it, you just stream it out, and half of it, like, not half, but even 90% of it will be total horseshit. But it's part of it is to clear your mind, to get all the junk out so you can start writing more clearly. But part of it is in that 90% bullshit, you could find 10% that actually is something you want to hang on to and then do it again more properly. And she was basically having him do that. And I in the other review I did, I was joking about how she was saying all these other common writing things. So, oh, make sure you use a 3-plot structure and have the protagonist have to have a hero's journey, a call to action in the first act, and make sure you spell there as in they are going somewhere with an apostrophe, because it really pisses me off when people spell it the other way. Just the way she's fucking talking is just like, God! Sorry. I'm sorry. It's so annoying. And this ties into a bigger issue that I've also addressed in some other videos about how the writers really did not know what to do with Jake Sisko. Like, so they created him as a son of Benjamin. And to be fair, when they touched on this relationship between Benjamin and Jake, it was amazing. And in fact, it really enhanced the character of Benjamin. And in fact, this is, I believe, the only captain we've had in the Star Trek so far who has had a son or an offspring, particularly with them on their journey during the show. And I do think that was a bold move, and I do totally agree with it. But the problem is that you don't need to have Jake around all the time. Like, when they do touch on this father-son relationship, like The Visitor, for example, it's very powerful and it really works. Even a few stray other episodes like Rapture, I thought, some people hate that episode. I personally like it. I thought that was a strong example of the Jake and Benjamin relationship. Not Rapture, I'm sorry, The Reckonings. The Reckoning is the one I like and most people hate, but that's another topic, though. But the thing is that they decided to make him a main cast member. Like, he is officially a main cast member, his name appears on the credits, and I think that's a mistake. I think that he should have been a supporting character, much like Nog or Ram or Garrick or Dukat. And there's nothing wrong with being a supporting character. Garrick and Dukat are some of the best characters in the entire fucking show. So I'm not saying that that's a negative thing to have. But there's nothing wrong. Don't be ashamed of being a supporting character. There's absolutely nothing wrong with it. And you could have Jake be a supporting character and still have episodes like The Visitor and other episodes of Explorers, although I didn't like that one, but again, another topic. But you can still have these strong Bond episodes with Benjamin and Jake. Now, why does it make a difference whether he's a supporting character or main cast member, you might ask? Answer is, because he's a main cast member, the writers feel obligated to include him more often, because he's the main cast member, so he should be in it. Basically, he should be in every episode. He's not. He's probably the main cast member who appears the least, but he's supposed to be, and so he has to try to be in almost every episode, and they have to try to craft stories about him. Now, here's the thing. During the first and second season, particularly the first season, this worked fine because he was a teenager, and he could go off on his teenage rambunctious adventures or whatever on the station, but he started to get a bit older. By teenager, I mean, I should be saying pre-adolescent, like 11, 12, 13, 14, but when he started getting older, more 15, 16, 17, 18 age range, it becomes a bit less. You can't have these adolescent adventures anymore, so he becomes a different character. And I think in season 2 they had made the decision to not have him join Starfleet because it seemed like the natural progression. Like Wesley, for example, was always being groomed to join Starfleet over on Next Generation, and so they decided, well, let's be different. Let's go in a different route. Let's say that he doesn't want to join Starfleet. He wants to become a writer. And this, I recently saw an interview with a writer. I can't recall his name off the top of my head. Hewitt Wolf something. Where he was saying that was actually, he kind of based that off his own life because he lived in a military family, and most of the people in his generational joined the military, and he had to decide that actually I don't want to join the military, I want to become a writer, and that was a conversation that he had with his family, so he kind of drew inspiration from that and decided, oh, let's give the same thing to Jake, that he wants to become a writer. And again, I do agree with all the reasoning on why they did that. But again, this comes back to the problem of him being a main cast member. If he was a supporting character, which by all rights he should have been, there's nothing wrong with this. But the problem is, if you make him a writer, there's not that much you can do with him. That is the fall backside of that. Is that if he did join Starfleet, then okay, you could have him fill Nog with the role that Nog actually later filled, because Nog ended up becoming a more important character than Jake in the later seasons, because he's actually in fucking Starfleet. He's in Starfleet! Anyways, thank you. You're welcome, I should say, for Carrie 009. But anyway, sorry, inside joke. Anyway, so Nog is in Starfleet and Jake isn't, so he actually got more screen time and was a more important character. And the problem is, there's a lot of episodes in the later part of the show that try to focus on Jake and suck because they just couldn't do anything with them. And so they felt obligated to include him, and particularly have episodes focus on him because he is a main cast member. So I think they should have done one of two things. Either just bite the bullet and have him join Starfleet, which again, there's nothing wrong with joining Starfleet. Nog joined Starfleet. I mean, I get the direction they wanted to take it to say, like, oh, he's not obligated to join just because his father's in, which is cool. But, so option one, have him join Starfleet. Option two, if you don't want him to join Starfleet and you want him to go his own way, have him be a supporting character, not a main cast member. That way you don't feel obligated to focus on him. You can just bring him back very sparingly, like a couple episodes a year, like they do with Garrick or Ducat, when it's relevant to Benjamin Sisko. Maybe you can have him in the background, when it's like kind of like they do with Nog and Rom. You see Nog and Rom a lot, but they're technically supporting characters, and when it's relevant to Sisko's story, you can have him at home cooking dinner or whatever, but you don't feel obligated to have episodes that focus on him. That way you don't get crap like this or Valiant later in season 6. But again, that's another discussion. Yeah. So they should have went one of those two ways. Because this episode is obviously a result, which is why I'm bringing this whole thing up, of the writers having no idea what to do with Jake and then wanting and feeling obligated to do something with Jake because he's a main cast member. But they've already decided that he was a writer. So if he's a writer, what the fuck can we do with him? Well, let's do this tired old cliche storyline about a muse making him write better, which is, again, as I said, is a tired and cliche storyline. Because once they made it a writer, that really limited their options on what they could do in a sci-fi show like this. And so they did it as something that was very tired, cliche, and not very good. Now, here's the thing I will say, though, and I said this before, is that they're actually are good versions of the story. There are things they could have done with this premise that actually would have been really good. Like, they could have made this an ongoing storyline where Jake is dating this older woman and meets this older woman who's like rich and sees talent in him and is kind of corrupting him. She's like maybe involved with some bad people. He gets involved with like drugs or whatever, or some criminal elements, and he starts more and more as he like falls for this older woman who's clearly a bad influence for him. His life starts to get derailed and it becomes a problem with him and Benjamin. Notice how there's not really a sci-fi element to that, which is exactly what I think they should have done. I think they should not have had a sci-fi element, even if they made this a standalone episode, although I do think it would have worked better as a recurring character. But even if they did it as a standalone episode, it would have been a lot more interesting if it was just a normal woman who's like this much older woman who is like using him and is a bad influence on him. It could have been a really good character piece and sort of brought out the relationship between him and his father and how he's torn between these two things. I mean, they kind of played with this in this subplot in season 3. I can't even remember what episode it was in, where he was dating an older Diablo girl, but she actually turned out to be really nice and a good influence on him, and it was actually really smart, and Benjamin was totally had a total misconception about wanting to break them up. But they could have done that where the the woman that Jake was dating actually was a terrible influence and just using him and derailing his life. And I think that could have been a really strong character story for Jake. It could have been a great way to use Jake, but they felt so obligated not only to have him be the main plot, but also to add in this sci-fi element. So it is a tired cliche thing we've seen throughout Star Trek a lot, and as I said, throughout basically all storytelling a lot. We have the energy vampire sucking the energy, and the way it was done in this episode, I'm sorry, was so goddamn cheesy. I know, I mean, there's really no other way to describe it. Jake is sitting there writing, and she's sitting there sucking. You see the energy things coming out of his head while he's writing. She's like, "Ooh, I like the energy. Ooh, I like the energy." I'm sorry. It was just so goddamn cheesy. And then they had the fake stakes where she tells him, "Oh, you should rest." Why does she do? I don't get this. Because he's like, "No, I don't want to rest. I want to keep writing." And she's like, No, you should rest. They try to imply, I think, this because she doesn't want him to die yet. She wants to prolong this and keep him alive longer. But she tells him to go have some food, and when he goes to have some food, he just collapses on the ground, and as Bashir and the other medical teams take care of him and sort of try to censure him away from her. Why didn't she know that would happen? I mean, obviously that would happen, but of course she breaks in and does her ghost thing, and reappears as an energy beam and shoots. I think she kills the nurse, who was played by an actress from Babylon 5. But anyway, she was playing a Bajoran nurse, and I think this energy being just killed her and stole Jake away. And fake steak. Ooh, gotta create some tension in fake stakes where Cisco's looking around the station for him and finds him and just, tells the energy being to go away, and she tries to shoot a phaser at her, but she turns into energy. And then she flies out of the station. Ooh, isn't that creepy and mysterious? Ooh, isn't that dark? Ooh. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, but that was so stupid. First of all, again, this is very cliche, especially in Star Trek. Similar shit's been done like this over and over again, but this is a much cheesier, much poorly written version of that cliche that we've already seen dozens of times before. So, and then they talk about Jake, the book that he started writing. And the one little nugget of this episode that I actually liked is that it was calling back to The Visitor, because in The Visitor they showed this possible future where Jake was famous for writing 2 books. One of them was called Anselm, and in this episode they actually show you that the title of the book he's writing is called Anselm, that he apparently wrote the first half of, which I do appreciate that, but I wish they would have been able to bring that book back in a more interesting way than this bullshit. As I said, they could have just had a normal relationship with a normal middle-aged woman who was a bad influence on him, and that could have been the beginning of this book, because usually out of dark experiences, actually some really good literary works can come out of that. So that could have been an interesting route they did, but having this stupid energy vampire going, "Ooh, this is how you write. Use a comma in your sentences, Jake. Ooh, let me suck the energy." I'm sorry. Now I'm just making fun of it rather than reviewing it, but that's what this fucking episode deserves, because hashtag fuck the Muse. Anyway, my rating for the Muse out of 10 is a 1. I gotta yell that, because it's not just a 1, it's a 1! The worst! Terrible! It absolutely deserves to be number 5 in my top 5 of the worst episodes that the entire Star Trek franchise has ever produced. Not only does it have a terrible B-plot, it has an even worse, which is a huge accomplishment considering how terrible the B-plot is. It has an even worse A-plot. I can't think of any other examples of it. And the whole episode is like a first draft, and it's more frustrating to me that this episode actually, well, at least the Jake side of it, the Lwaxana thing, they just could have torpedoed and threw it in the trash. But because she has no chemistry with Oda, she should just go to her fucking daughter if she gets pregnant on Oda. The whole thing is bullshit. So that should have went in the garbage. But the A-plot with Jake actually could have been done correctly, so it's frustrating to me that I see glimmers of an idea. And this is similar to what I think Ronald D. Moore was talking about, how they had an interesting idea, because I can see this is born out of like some interesting discussions in the writer's room, but for whatever reason the final product was just didn't live up to that at all, and he himself and the other writers seemed to recognize that. So yes, like David Livingston said, the director of this episode, I wish that this episode never happened. So that is it for my review of hashtag fuck the Muse. Number 5 on my worst list. I will be back in a week to cover number 4, getting down to the nitty gritty now. So be sure to check out my channel for that. Also check out my channel for many more Star Trek videos, as well as many other videos and other shows like The Expanse and more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.